Hello everyone, and welcome to another Fusion 360 Live. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about using another Autodesk product called Mudbox to create custom textures that you can bring into Fusion and use to create more like organic or textured type objects in Fusion 360. Now, before I get started, I'm hoping all of you have noticed that we did a huge release last night all about electronics design. So here's the what's new. So I'm just going to kind of scroll through here, but we've now added Eagle into Fusion 360, and I'm not going to cover too much stuff in here. I want you to go through and take a look at this, but you can create schematics, PCBs. I mean, it's just incredible what we've added into this release. And then not only that, it allows you to actually create the shape and turn it into a 3D model. So I'm going to keep scrolling. You can see there's a lot of really cool stuff in here. But then allows you to create a 3D model that you can bring into Fusion. So definitely make sure that you update to the latest release to see all this new functionality. And keep an eye out for an upcoming live stream where we're probably going to talk a lot more about ECAD inside of Fusion 360. Also, if you haven't purchased Fusion yet, we're offering a 40% discount right now. So take a look at the Fusion 360 webpage, the Facebook group, etc. For that information. I know Aaron's online right now. He might be able to point you to a particular location. But anyways, 40% off, great deal. So let's go move forward here. Why are we doing, let me switch over, sorry. And I already messed it up. Darn it. Okay. Anyways, I had an example I wanted to show, but I hit the wrong button on my mouse. I wanted to talk about Mudbox. And why am I showing Mudbox versus just showing something in Fusion 360? Well, Mudbox is actually a really cool Autodesk product and allows you to create some custom textures and stuff. And I was going to show a really cool sign, but for whatever reason it went away and I can't bring it back, so I apologize about that. But for example, you can create like wood grain textures for the backgrounds of your signs. So for example, let me just do this. I'll do wood grain signs or something like that. Oops, spell it right. And so, you know, some people, like for example, here's a prime example right here. So you can kind of see this wood grain engraved in the background. Same thing, this is actually the image I had up earlier, where you can kind of see just these striations going through. Just adds a little bit more character, a little bit more texture to your design. And I was thinking, how could we do something like that inside of Fusion? And this is where Mudbox really comes into play. Now you might be asking, what the heck is Mudbox? Well, this product was actually created by people that were working on the Lord of the Rings movies at Weta Digital. So it's been around for a little while. Autodesk purchased that from them, and I'm just going to scroll through and show you some examples of what you can do with it. Now, we're not going to be creating dinosaurs and profiles or anything like that, but the reason I wanted to show this image is you'll notice this basically like this stencil, and you can just paint right over it, and it creates these bumps and textures and wrinkles, and that's kind of the technology we're going to use. So even the dragon from some of the movies that you see or the TV shows, I did this one this morning. I was like, wonder if I could create like a landscape texture. You know, if I wanted to 3D print something for maybe like a train layout, you know, model train layout or something. And believe it or not, this guy was created in Mudbox along with this dessert image here also. So they created the shapes and then texturized it, rendered it, etc., using like Autodesk Maya, for example. So that's what we're going to be showing today. And I'm not going to go real in-depth into how to use it. I'm just going to show how you could use it to create your own custom texture. There's a lot of tutorials out on YouTube on how to use Mudbox, so if this is something interesting to you, definitely do a search out there. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new scene, and it allows you to start with some basic shapes. So you can kind of see heads, animals, cars, cubes, etc. I'm just going to start with a basic plane. And you'll notice that some of the icons look very similar. Somebody mentioned you can do what I'm showing you here in Blender, but I find Blender to be actually pretty hard to use. You kind of have to really understand it. And the fact that this is an Autodesk product, it's going to feel similar to Fusion. It's going to feel similar to some of our other products. Okay, so I just started out with a basic plane. So you can kind of see, it looks like a basic plane right here. And you'll notice the grid on there. Okay, now I have these sculpt tools, and you can see we can sculpt and smooth and pinch and flatten, etc. And so watch what happens. I don't want to be in paint, I want to be in sculpt, sorry. I'm going to just drag my cursor on this plane, and you can kind of see it's pulling that material up. So if I rotate it kind of to the side, you can see it's actually kind of like lifting that up. Now you'll notice it looks kind of blocky, and that is because of the resolution of my plane. If I go into Mesh and say Add New Subdivisional Level, notice I'm now at level 3, and my grid looks a little bit smoother, or tighter I should say, and now you don't see those blocky shapes anymore. You see them a little bit, okay? So let's go up another level. So I'll go in Mesh, add a new subdivisional level, and you can see it gets even tighter. And then if I create let me make my brush a little bit smaller, now you'll see I have a much smoother transition. I can paint on top of these. So this is kind of the idea of using Mudbox. So it allows you to sculpt, you can smooth. So for example, I'm just going to kind of smooth this region out a little bit. If you have a tablet, you can actually use like a pen and tablet, and you can create, like what I showed in those images before, some pretty complex designs. So here I can kind of grab and pull, move around if I want to, flatten, so I can kind of flatten this area out. Okay, again, not going to go into too much detail here, but I just kind of wanted to show what Mudbox is all about. So I'm going to use one of these stencils to help me out, and this is what you kind of saw in that one image. So check this out. I'm going to increase my level. Let's go to maybe like level 5. So pretty fine grid. In fact, it's almost impossible to see now unless I zoom in. Now you can start to see the little individual grid shapes. And I'm just going to bring in one of these stencils. Let me just pick, let me just find something that looks, yeah, there we go. This is kind of like an animal skin or something like that. And what I can do is now I can drag on here. So let me go ahead and sculpt. And you'll notice as I'm dragging, it's actually using this image to create that three-dimensional shape. And obviously if I didn't have these many little grid icons, it wouldn't be as detailed as you see it here. Okay. Then we turn this off, and you see I now have a three-dimensional, oops, the wrong button, a three-dimensional shape. Okay. So that's kind of the idea of what we're going to be doing today, but obviously we're going to not use animal skin, we're going to use like wood grain, etc. Now I'll go ahead and turn that back on real quick. Let me show you in the sculpt. You actually have some control. You'll notice we have size and we have strength. So the size is the size of my brush. So you can see it's fairly large right now. So it's covering a large area. If I crank that down to something pretty small, now it's only doing a little small area. Then I also have, let me increase that, I also have my strength. So if I increase the strength, it's going to be much thicker. If I crank the strength way down, let's just do maybe something like 5, you'll notice it's barely making an indentation, if you want to call it that. So the size and the strength will allow you to change how your 3D image ends up, how much it's going to be 3D basically. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to zoom back out again, or undo I should say. Now you'll notice there's lots of different stencils in here. So again, something like this, if I drag on top of that, I get a pretty interesting result, right? This would be very difficult to model in Fusion, but be pretty easy to manufacture, right? Once you have the 3D model, you can tell it to, contour along here or whatever to cut those little dips and dimples and indentations, etc. And there's a bunch of different kinds of stencils in here. Now, some of them make more sense than others. For example, there's lots of animal skin and fur and stuff like that, but you can actually create your own custom stencils. And I'm going to show that here in a little bit. But for example, this one here, pretty interesting. I'm going to increase the size. And let's just kind of drag across that, and you can kind of see what shape it's creating. So kind of a marbly, broken stone or something like that maybe for a background. Okay. Now you'll notice I've actually added a bunch of my own down here. So for example, this is the one we're going to be using for today's demonstration. All I did is go out to Google Images and do a search for wood grain or wavy texture or brick or whatever. And so you'll notice I'll just click through all the ones I've added. So there's some wood grain. Here's another kind of a wood grain, and we'll go through all of these. Here's kind of a chiseled look, for example. More, lots of different kinds of wood grains. And so I wanted to kind of show how you could use these to create a wood grain texture. So here I'm just kind of dragging using that stencil. So it's now changing my object to a 3D object. And you'll notice kind of the more I drag on it, the taller the peaks are getting. And there we go. I'm going to turn that stencil off. And I always hold down the wrong button. And you can kind of see how it's now created a three-dimensional representation using that stencil. So hopefully you find that pretty cool and how fast we were able to do that. And what's really neat about this is now I can come back and I could smooth some of these areas out. So maybe this crease right here, I could come in and just kind of drag on that and smooth some of it out, for example. So you can kind of see I can smooth that whole area out. Obviously, the longer you drag on it, the smoother it gets, and you start losing some of the detail. You can scrape, which kind of basically drags and gets rid of the tall peaks but doesn't destroy some of the details down below. So it's actually kind of like scraping the top layer off. So my point here is you're not even limited to the stencils. You can start with that and then tweak it to your heart's content. In fact, you could even come in and add multiple stencils. So I could add this stencil on top and then come in and sculpt and add some of that in there. Now you'll notice it's kind of really covering up what I already did. So maybe I'm going to change the strength to be, something fairly small, like just like 1, for example. And now you can see how I'm using that new texture to modify this existing texture to add a little bit more wood grain to it. So you can kind of see the difference from over here to over here. Okay. Now, how do you add your own stencils? It's this little icon right here. So if I click on this little arrow, you can see it says Add Stencil. And all I need to do is go out and find, a picture or a texture or something like that. Let me just do, I think I might have some in pictures. Bear with me. So here you can kind of see all the different ones. So for example, I have this granite. I'm just going to go ahead and install this granite. I'll say OK, and I now have this little granite image. It's literally that simple. So if I were to, let's just do a new scene real quick. Again, I'll start with a plane. I find that kind of the easiest for this example at least. And then I'm going to increase my detail. Let's just go maybe to level 5 this time. I'll throw my image on there, and it's kind of hard to see, but you can kind of see now if I paint, I'm getting that kind of that speckled texture on there. If I were to increase the strength, it would be, you know, a lot more of a texture. So it's literally that simple. You can bring in any picture, any image. You'll notice they even have like weird shapes like this where it's, you know, just staying inside that particular shape, for example. Okay, you can do pretty much anything that you want in this product. So let's do an actual one here. I'm going to do this wave here, and you'll notice over here it says move, rotate, and scale, the stencil. So it says S and middle mouse button. So I can move this stencil wherever I want on my plane. I can rotate it if I want to whichever direction I want. And I could also scale it. So if I do S right mouse button, you can see I can change the scale of it. So I'm going to make sure it covers up most of my box that I have there. So let's just do something like that. I'll come into my sculpt, and let's just do maybe something around like the strength of 12. And you'll notice that my brush is kind of small, so I'm going to increase my brush to be a little bit larger, and then I'm just going to start to drag kind of back and forth, and you can see how I'm getting this three-dimensional brush texture. And again, the more I drag over it, the more detail it's going to be being added to it. And that's it. So you can see it used the stencil. I'll go ahead and say off, and so you can kind of see what it looks like now as a 3D object. And again, if I zoom up, you can kind of see how it really created some peaks and it really created some valleys. Now you'll notice it's a little bit blocky, and that's because I didn't go to the highest level. But in this case, since I'm going to be cutting it out of wood, I don't need it to be absolutely perfect, because you know the cutter is going to come along and kind of go up and over these ridges and stuff like that. So I'm going to keep it as simple as I can. However, I want to smooth it out, so I'm going to hit smooth, and let's change the strength down a little bit, maybe in the 20s. And you can see now I can kind of rub over that, and it's smoothing out some of the texture there and creating a much nicer looking result. And again, it might be kind of hard to see on the shared window through YouTube, but you can kind of see it's getting rid of some of this blockiness, this graininess down at the bottom. And when I kind of drag over that, you'll see it's kind of smoothing that out and making a nice looking texture. And literally in just a couple seconds, I now have this nice wavy texture. Okay, let's say that's what I want. That's looking good. So I'm going to come in here and say Edit, Select All. It's going to select everything for me. And then I can come in and say Export Selection. So I'll go ahead and say Export Selection. And you'll notice I've got a lot of them here, but it's going to save it out as an OBJ file. So I type in my file name that I want. I hit save, and I've already done this, so I'm not going to waste the time to do that, but it'll save it onto your desktop or wherever you want to save it, and it's literally that simple. So the next step is to bring it into Fusion. So that's all I'm really going to show about Mudbox. Honestly, there's a ton of stuff you can do with this. In fact, you saw that landscape that I was doing earlier. That was just kind of playing around with that. But let's jump into Fusion. And what I'm going to do now is I want to create like a sign that we're going to make. So for example, here's the end result. So you kind of see I've already brought it into manufacturing, but I've got that wavy texture in the background. I've got some text that I want to machine. I've got this, this, I don't even know what you want to call it, but you can kind of see the idea of the sign, and that's what we're going to do. And you can see, for example, if I click on this scallop, it's actually going to machine away. I'll zoom up here. It's actually going to machine and engrave all of these bumps and ridges and text, etc. So this is kind of the end product. This is the taking the cake out of the oven. So now I'm going to show you how did I go about doing this. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. I'm going to start a new design, and I always like to use components. So I'm going to create a new component. I'll just call it sign. I'll say OK, and I now have a component called sign. And the reason for that is everything that has to do with this is going to be underneath that component. Now I'm going to start by basically designing the frame. And I know I'm going to be machining it with a CNC machine, so I clicked on my top plane to do my design. That way it's in the correct orientation. Okay. I just looked at the chat. Somebody said curlicues. Yep, that's what we're going to call those. These are curlicues now. So thanks, I couldn't think of any word. So they're now called curlicues. Okay, I'm going to go to my rectangle. I really like the center rectangle command. And I'm in inches, so I'm going to make this, a pretty large sign. So let's go ahead and let's just make it maybe like 32 wide by, I don't know, 20 tall or something. Let's just see what that kind of looks like. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Yeah, so it's a little bit more rectangular and stuff, so that looks good. I'll say okay. And then I want to add this rounded top. And again, I'm just showing a way of doing it. I'm not saying this is the way to do it. But I'm just going to go ahead and create a circle. And I'll do maybe, I don't know, something around 20 actually looks pretty good. So I'll say 20. And I want to make sure that this circle is in the correct location. So you'll notice it's blue, which means it's not constrained. So I'm going to say horizontal, vertical, and I want that point and that point to be vertical with each other. Okay. Then I notice it's still blue, so I'm going to throw a dimension. Let's just maybe go from that point to that point, and I'll just say maybe 5 inches. And that gives me a nice kind of transition here. So you can kind of see what that looks like. And now my object line is blue, which means it's going to be fully constrained. It can't change. So I'm going to do the exact same thing again. I'm just going to draw a circle. And I don't care about the size this time. Okay, we're going to use constraints for this. I'll say I want them to be equal. So I'll say that circle and that circle are equal in size. Horizontal, vertical again, I'll align those guys up. And I'll throw a dimension from there to there. I'll place that dimension, and I could type in 5, but if I click on this existing dimension, it's going to reference it and put it in the right location, and now you see I kind of have the basic shape of what it's going to look like. Now, I always say keep your sketches simple and all kind of stuff, and I talked about keeping it constrained. I'm going to trim these edges out of here. So when I hit T for trim, notice what happens. It trims to the next boundary. So, and you'll notice sometimes I might get some warning saying it's no longer constrained, etc., but that's okay. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and just trim those 3 lines. And then I'll do the same thing here. I'll trim those 3 lines. Now what about the rest of this? I don't need to trim them. I'm just going to go ahead and delete those off of there. And you'll notice because I did that, it lost its, the dimensional constraints or whatever. But in this case, I don't care too much. I kind of have the design the way I want. I'm going to go ahead and also fillet the corners. Now, if you, a lot of you I know watch a lot of my live streams, you're going, what? Brad just said in all of his previous live streams, don't ever use 2D fillet, do it in 3D. Here's one of those examples where doing it in 2D is actually going to help me in the long run. So this is one of those situations where I am actually going to use the 2D fillet command. So I'll come under here and say fillet. I'll grab these 2 edges here, and I'm going to do a fairly large fillet. Let's do maybe like a 3-inch fillet. And I'm going to go ahead and fillet all of these edges here, that 3-inch fillet. So I'm just going to kind of walk around like so. And you'll see why this is going to pay off in the long run. It's because I'm going to do a lot of offsetting. I'm going to use the offset commands to help me out. So I've rounded over my corners. Now I want to start to build. Let me show you in this example. So I'm going to offset to get this line here, and then I'm going to offset it again to get this shape and this shape here. And because I did the fillet in 2D, it's going to make the other fillets the correct size. If these were squared off and I ended up doing the fillets in 3D, I'd have to know the math. I'd have to figure out what's this inside radius versus this outside radius, and I'd have to do that multiple times. So let's let Fusion do the hard work. So I'll come in here, we'll say offset. I'll go ahead and click my profile and start to drag in. And let's just go 1 inch in this case, and here exactly you can see what I was talking about. It's going to figure out what radius that needs to be. So I just offsetted my original profile in 1 inch. Now I can keep doing that again to do these other ones. So I'm going to click that outside profile, and let's go in like 1.5 inches. So I'll say 1.5, and once more to get that interior thicker shape there, minus 2.5. Those are kind of the sizes I want. And you'll notice again it created that little tiny fillet in the corner. So this saved me a lot of time by doing the fillets in 2D instead of in 3D. Okay, let me hit finish. So now I have my shape, and I'm just going to go ahead and select my profiles and say extrude. I'm going to extrude up. Let's just go maybe, I don't know, maybe 1.5 inches in this case, because I want to have extra material, and this will make more sense here in a moment. But I'm basically defining how thick I want to extrude this, and we're going to bring that wavy mesh and kind of put it in between these profiles, or these extrusions I should say. Okay, so pretty quickly I was able to create the shape that I want for my frame. Now I like it, so I'm going to go ahead and hit save. I recommend saving often, so I'll call this Tech Tuesday sign. I'm sorry, Tech Thursday. My bad. Don't even know what day it is. Sign. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to bring in that file that we created in Mudbox. So let me just go into my insert menu, and I'm going to say insert mesh, because it is a mesh file, and it's on my desktop. There's the one I saved, Mudbox Wave. I'll say open, and you'll see pretty quickly it actually brought it in. Now you'll notice it's in the wrong orientation, but that's okay. I'm just going to rotate this to be 90 degrees. Okay. Another trick that I usually do, I usually say center, and it'll kind of center it, and then also I'll say move to ground, and that kind of moves it to that 0, 0, 0 location. And I'll just go ahead, and one of the things I want to make sure, and mine is already set to millimeter because I've practiced this earlier. By default, I think it comes in inch, and it would be huge. So make sure you bring it in millimeter, because that's the units that Mudbox is using. So for example, in Mudbox, if it's 12 by 12 millimeters, it would come in 12 inches by 12 inches if it was set to inch and stuff like that. So again, be aware, make sure you're set to millimeter, and then we're going to say OK. Now obviously it's the wrong size, but we're going to go ahead and fix that. So you'll notice I now have a mesh feature in my timeline. If I right click on that and say edit, I'm now kind of in this mesh environment. Now if you try this and you don't get this mesh environment, make sure that in your preferences under preview that you have Mesh Workspace turned on. So you might want to make sure that that's turned on before you try this, okay? Oh, another thing I forgot to mention about Mudbox, it is an Autodesk product, and it is a subscription, but it's only like $10 a month or $80 for the whole year. So it's fairly inexpensive. And even for like $10 a month, maybe you're working on a project where you want to do something like this. For $10, you can create some pretty cool textures very, very quickly and very easily, instead of trying to do it with like surfacing or whatever. Think about how long this would take to do using like freeform or sweeps and lofts, etc. We literally did this in just a couple mouse clicks. Okay, so I brought in the mesh, I'm editing the mesh, and now I can come in here and say scale. I'll go ahead and click on there, and I'm just going to kind of zoom out a little bit, and we can scale this mesh up and move it around, etc. So I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger than it needs to be. So I'll do something like that. Maybe I want to move the mesh around. Oops. So I'll just click and kind of position it. I don't really need it to go all the way to the extent, but maybe I will. Well, let's scale it back up again one more time. So scale. And I'll just make it just big enough to cover everything. Now if I look at it from the side, and actually before I do that, notice the little square. So this is a quad mesh. And these little squares are the detail that there was in Mudbox. That's what these little tiny squares are in here. Okay? So obviously the more squares you have, the more complex it's going to be, and the longer it will take to calculate. So again, I would go as high as you need to, but don't go crazy. Don't go 6, 7, 8 levels high. Try 3, 4, 5 levels high. And if it's not detailed enough, go up one more level and see what that looks like. And for me, this is definitely detailed enough for what I'm going to be trying to do here. Okay? Now it's floating above my sign, so I'm going to go in here. Let's just move this down. And I'm just going to kind of make it interfere just a little bit with my objects here. Again, I'm kind of just eyeballing it here, seeing what it looks like. So we can kind of, basically I want to make sure that it's not below this inside frame. And it looks like it's fine in this case. So for example here, it's kind of hard to highlight. You'll notice that it is below the outside frame. You see how it's kind of going up and over that outside frame, but we're okay on the inside. And that's all I really care about right now, is making sure it's on the inside frame. I'll say okay, and I've now positioned it where I need it to be. You can kind of see that. I'll say finish mesh. Okay. Now, I like what it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and save, just in case. I'll say okay. Now, here's the thing. I will actually want to, you have two options here. And I was kind of torn on what should I show. If you just leave it the way it is, you're totally fine. You can machine this and everything, and your cutter is going to come around and cut around this outside. But being the anal retentive guy that I am, I didn't want this extra material floating around on the outside. So I'm going to show the extra steps that you need to take to actually be able to use this to convert it to an actual like B-rep surface. To do that, I need to not capture my design history. Now be careful with this, because as soon as I do this, I'm going to lose the features that I had created. For example, my extrude feature, anything else I might have had done, like a chamfer or whatever. So watch what happens when I say do not capture design history. It says the timeline and all design history will be removed. So this is a major flip of the switch, basically. So when I say continue, you'll notice that my timeline went away. So I can't go back and edit those features. Okay? But this does allow me to convert this quad mesh. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and expand open here. I'll expand up my bodies, and there's that quad mesh right there. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on it and say convert. Now do not do mesh to B-rep. We kind of need to go the extra step with convert. When I tried doing the mesh to B-rep, it was too complicated, and it couldn't figure out what to do. So we're actually going to convert this from a quad mesh, and you'll notice it automatically recognized it as a quad mesh. We're going to convert it from a quad mesh to a t-spline, and then we're going to convert the t-spline to a B-rep surface. I just looked over at the chat really quick. Somebody said, couldn't you use split surface or split face? Because this is not an actual object, you can't. And that's exactly why I'm showing you these processes of converting it, because I do want to use split face to get rid of that extra material. So thank you. I'm glad you guys are thinking. So I'm going to say convert quad mesh to t-spline. Now this could take a couple seconds, a couple minutes, depending on the complexity. And again, that's my comment from earlier. Keep it as low resolution as you possibly can, just to help speed up your design process. So you can see that really didn't take all that long. Okay. Now you'll notice that that is turned off. It still exists, but it's turned off. And now I have this t-spline body. But what I'm going to do now is right click on this guy and say convert. And you'll notice t-spline to B-rep. And I'm just going to leave everything default. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And again, it's going to have to think about how am I going to convert this t-spline to a B-rep. But honestly, it didn't take that long. And now I have an actual body. It's an open body, but it's an actual body. You can kind of see how it looks all silvery, etc., kind of like what our regular faces look like. Now this is something I can work with. So for example, if I come in here and say split body, notice I can select it now, where previously I wouldn't have been able to select it. So that's my body to split. And then it's asking for the splitting tools. So I'll come in here and I'm just going to go ahead and select this whole body right now. I could come in here and maybe try and select just the inside edge, for example. But I'm going to do just the whole body, like so. I'll extend it if necessary. I don't know if it's going to need to or not, but I'll go ahead and say OK. And watch what happens over here. It's going to take a little bit of time to calculate, but I now have 3 separate bodies. So there's the one that's inside that frame, so I don't need that one. So I'll go ahead and delete that. I also have this outside one. I don't need that guy, so I'll say delete. And now I'm left with that mesh inside my frame. So I think it was for Fun RC. Thanks for asking that question. I'm glad you were thinking about that. And it's the exact method I was showing here, was using the split body. So we're on the same wavelength there. So, okay. So now I have this, and this is where I could switch into manufacturing and show you how you would go about manufacturing this, but I want to add some text into here, and I want to add that soup-de-doo or whatever somebody called it, that flourish. We're going to add that in there also. So I'm going to go ahead and create my text. I'm just going to create a new sketch on that top face. Let's create some text. I'll go ahead and place it. I'm going to rotate this up so it's vertical. And let's just do Fusion 360. Now it's really tiny, so I'm going to make the height, let's try maybe like 4. I'll pan. Let's kind of move this across a little bit. And that's kind of a thin font, so I'm going to pick a thicker font. I used Franklin earlier, which was kind of a good looking font, very similar to our Fusion logo. So let's just do that. You can kind of see it adds a little bit more thickness to it. And let's make it just a little bit bigger. Let's say 4.5 in this case. Okay, so I'm going to position the text where I want it to be. I'll say OK. And then I also want to add that flourish. And so I'm going to come in here and say insert a SVG, scalable vector graphic. So let me do that real quick. Select the file. And it's probably in my downloads. Yep, there it is. So it's an SVG file. And how I did this, again, I've done live streams on this before. But I went out to Google Images and just found an image of one that I liked and then brought it into Inkscape. And it's a free product that allows you to, let me do a horizontal flip, that looks good. It allows you to trace around an image. And so I just traced around it and it created this flourish. So let's just do something like that. Maybe just a little bit bigger and kind of position it where I want that to be. Okay. I'll call that good and I'll say finish sketch. So now I have some stuff that I can extrude. And again, this is what I was talking about earlier. I'm not saying that this is the right way of doing it or the best way of doing it. This is just how you could do it. So honestly, all I care about is I want to extrude these guys down, and I want to extrude them far enough that they cut through this wavy texture. So I'm going to just snap to the bottom of the object here. So you can kind of see it snaps down, and it's actually extending down below the wave. Okay, and I'm not going to trim the text or anything like that. I really honestly don't care that this extends down, because all we're going to be machining is these top surfaces. That's all I really care about. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's see. Now I kind of have the sign designed the way I want. I'll go ahead and save it, and I'll say, final design. Okay, and let's switch into our manufacture workspace. Now, again, I'm not a CAM specialist or anything like that, so what I'm showing you here might not be the best solution, but it's a solution. Just showing you how you can go from idea in your head to a part in your hand, all with one tool. In this case, two tools. We're using Mudbox, but the fact that we're able to bring that in and then actually physically manufacture this. So I'm going to start out by obviously doing a setup. And in my setup, I want to make sure that I select under model. I'm going to go ahead and select the whole sign. I want to incorporate pretty much everything in there. Obviously, we're going to do milling. And I'm just going to leave the stock the way it is. And in fact, if anything, maybe I might even take off the top stock offset. I'll just leave it 0. Obviously, I would probably face that off, but I'm going to skip that step in this case just to kind of speed things up. But I now have a setup that includes all of those models. Then one of the tool paths that I think works really good for this kind of this organic shape is the scallop tool path. So you can kind of see it creates passes at a constant distance from one another, and allows to follow sloping and vertical walls, etc. So you can kind of think of this as sloping walls. So I'm going to do scallop. And for the tool, because this is a fairly large sign, and I noticed somebody said, you must have a really large CNC machine. I personally don't, but yes, it is a fairly large sign. I'm going to pick a large tool. So let's start out with maybe like a 3/4 inch bullnose. I'll say OK, and you can kind of see the preview what that's going to look like. That looks good. Under the geometry tab, here's where things get interesting. So I'm going to basically pick the this shape right here. So I can click on that edge right there. And if I were to say OK right now, it would just machine this whole area, and it would machine through my text and all that kind of stuff. So I also want to add in the bottom edges of my text here. So I'm just going to get kind of near, and you'll notice I can click on get near it and it highlights it down below. I want to make sure I'm not getting like these individual little faces like that. I want to grab those, and I might even do like that interior one, making sure I grab the tool paths that I want. Now I could also speed things up by turning off the mesh in this case, but I like to keep it visible. I'll do the same thing with this flourish. Now there's some interior pockets that I need to make sure I'm grabbing, so I'm going to kind of hover over and grab these interior pockets. And that looks pretty good. Oops, one more looked like right there. And I'll say, make sure I got everything okay. And I'll say okay, and it's going to calculate. Now, due to time constraints, some of these tool paths take quite some time to calculate. Sometimes they might take a minute, 2 minutes, or more. So I'm going to do 1 or 2 of these to kind of show you, so you can kind of see it's at 4% right now, and then it's jumping up. And so you'll see what the final thing will look like here in just a second. So let me jump. So instead of just sitting here watching and waiting, I'm going to jump over to the one that I've already completed, and I'll show you the results. So there's that very first scallop. If I edit it, you'll notice it's going to be the 3/4 bull nose, so I'm not doing anything magical here. And it selected all of the areas in between, except for cutting through the flourish and all that kind of stuff. And so if I were to simulate this, I'll go ahead and jump to the end of it so we don't have to watch it cut or whatever. Let me make sure I got the stock turned on. You'll see what it's going to do, and it's going to basically remove a lot of the material for me in a first pass kind of a thing. So I wouldn't want to come and do this with a very small, like a 1/4 inch cutter or something like that. We're going to remove a majority of the material. So let's jump to the end here. Hopefully it goes. I think it's because it's also processing on my other sign. It's taking a little bit longer to do the preview, but you can kind of see it's showing you what the result would look like, and you can see that it's actually following those ridges of the wavy texture that we have in there. Okay. So let me turn off the models here, and you can kind of see this is what the end result looks like. So it removed a majority of the material, but obviously not the finished product, right? Okay. So I'll jump back here, and there, sure enough, there's my tool path, the finished one. So another neat tip I like to use is I've already selected all of that text. I've already selected a bunch of things. I don't want to have to reselect them. So I'm going to right click on my scallop and say duplicate. And it's going to just take that tool path and duplicate it. Okay. But in this case, I'm going to edit it and change the size of the tool to be a little bit smaller. So I'll come in here and pick maybe like, let's just do something down here. Maybe I could do like a 1/4 inch ball or something like that. Which, now that we've machined away a lot of the material already, we don't need to use a large cutter, so we can go to a smaller cutter like a 1/4 inch ball in this case. Now, one of the other things I want to do is under the passes tab, you'll notice that I can specify what my step over is. So I can specify how tight or loose my step over is. And I know Angelo's shown this in a couple of his live streams. If you right mouse click and say edit expression, you can see that it's basically taking the tool diameter. It's basically the step over is 50% of the tool diameter. So instead of having to type in like, 3/64 or whatever, 3/32, etc., you can come in here and just say, I want to do maybe like a 40% of the tool diameter or 30% of the tool diameter. You can do stuff like that. Okay. So instead of having to type in a number, you just right mouse click and edit the expression. Kind of a neat tip. I always forget that we have that, and when Angelo shows me that each time, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. The other option is I can turn on fillets. And what this is going to basically do is kind of help with the, as it approaches and gets close to this text, it's not going to kind of plow into the walls and stuff like that. So I could come in here and specify, for example, let's just do 0.125 in this case. And I'll say OK. And again, this is going to take a little bit of time to calculate, so we're going to jump over to the finished one, but you'll see it's actually going to analyze. It's going to kind of sometimes you'll see, like, for example, went to 71% and then back down again as it's calculating all the different areas, so you'll see that happen. So I'm going to jump back over here. Let's take a look at our second scallop, and obviously you can see a tighter step over, and you can kind of see how it's approaching the text and machining the text and all that kind of stuff, and it's getting into the areas that the larger cutter wasn't able to get into. And again, I could change that to be even a tighter step over if I wanted to get a really nice smooth surface. Okay, let's see, is it still working? Yeah, see, it's still calculating. This is what I was talking about earlier. It could take some time to calculate these. So let me continue on over here. The next thing that I did is all I did was I created a 2D pocket for this groove here, and it actually does not go all the way down. I just wanted to kind of give it some depth in my sign, so I don't have it cut all the way down to the bottom of the sign. So I'm just using a regular cutter to cut around and create a pocket. And then the last thing that I did was use a larger cutter to do a 2D contour around the outside. I could come in here, if I was cutting this on my CNC machine, I could come in here and add some tabs if I wanted to. So geometry, add some tabs. So I could add tabs to machine or cut those off once it's all said and done, sand them off, etc. So anyways, just a basic 2D contour. And let's go ahead and simulate this thing so you can kind of see what it's going to look like when it's all said and done. So a neat trick is if you want to see each step, if I just hit play, it's going to animate and it's going to take quite some time. So you can kind of see it's actually thinking quite hard. So if you hit this little icon right here, it says go to the next operation. So if I click on that, it's actually going to jump from this operation to the next operation here. And it's going to kind of preview that for me. And then I could jump to the next one after that. Now again, it's doing some pretty complex machining, so it's taking some time to even do the preview. So you can kind of see now it's coming in and doing the ball here in just a moment. It's hard to see, but there's like a red line down here at the bottom. It's really hard to see, but it's going across. And that's kind of showing where the preview is updating. And so I can go to the next operation and you'll see what that looks like. Or I could jump all the way to the end. And if I hit all the way to the end, it's going to simulate all of the tool paths and just basically give me kind of a final result. And again, it's going to take some time. For those of you that are really observant, yes, I do have a lot of errors in here. And again, I didn't worry about what tool was I using, how deep can it go, all that kind of stuff. I just wanted to kind of show the idea. Obviously, I would use the correct tool, making sure that I have enough flute length, etc. But now you can see it's starting to come in and do the finer preview. So here's the first one that we did, and now it's coming in and doing the finer preview. And then the last thing that I usually do is I turn off the models. And so you can kind of see just a finished result. In fact, in this case, you can see I didn't do a facing operation, so it's actually coming up and removing a little bit of material up on the top. Okay, so it's taking quite some time to calculate that. But the final result, I think you saw, I did a rendering. Let me bring that up real quick. I'll find that rendering for you. And so you can kind of see what that looks like. So here you can see, let me zoom up on that just a little bit. You here's like what the final result would look like. Nice smooth surfaces. I might have to hit it a little bit with some sandpaper or whatever, but I've got that wavy texture for the background. And again, this is just a simple example. I could do wood grain. I could do a pattern or something like that using Mudbox to create basically that mesh that we used. Okay, so it looks like that. It looks like that preview is going to take quite some time to calculate, probably because I'm pushing stuff out to YouTube, etc. Usually it's pretty quick, but hopefully you saw how you can use a product such as Mudbox or Blender to create an organic shape and bring that in and actually machine it using Fusion 360. So again, make sure if you haven't already, update to the latest version. Check out all the cool stuff that we've added. I'm really excited about this. You'll probably, like I mentioned before, see a live stream on it here pretty soon. And hope to see you on a future live stream. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.